The sun blazed mercilessly over Austin, Texas, casting shimmering waves of heat across the chrome-lined lot of Regal Drive, a luxury car dealership known for its exclusivity and gleaming reputation. The morning had already given way to the rush of midday traffic, but inside the glass-encased showroom, time moved to a different rhythm, one dictated by soft classical music, polished tile floors, and the quiet hush of premium sales. That rhythm came to a jarring pause the moment Maya Thompson stepped through the doors. She was not what anyone expected in such a place, not in her faded Navy janitor's uniform, not with her worn sneakers leaving silent marks on the gleaming floor, not with the bulky gray cleaning tote slung over one shoulder and a spray bottle swinging at her hip. Heads turned, not out of welcome, but confusion. Mild disdain even. A few sales consultants exchanged looks, brows raised as if to ask each other, who let the cleaning crew in through the front? Maya paused only for a moment, long enough to take in the pristine layout of the showroom, the rows of premium sedans, the tailored suits of sales reps, the glint of fresh polish on each hood. Then she continued, unhurried, walking the center aisle like she belonged there, though everything about her appearance said she didn't. She knew exactly what she was doing. Just days ago, Maya had signed the final documents to acquire Regal Drive in full, becoming the sole owner through a silent deal brokered with a Dallas-based investment group. After 20 years of working her way up from cleaning floors in corporate buildings to becoming a private investor in industrial real estate, she had built a modest fortune. Now at 45, with deep roots in the community and a quiet reputation for outsmarting everyone who underestimated her, she had decided to take on something personal. Regal Drive had long been rumored for poor service, especially toward customers who didn't look the part. Maya had seen the complaints, she had read the reviews, she had spoken to past employees who'd left quietly, frustrated and disillusioned, and she had decided she would see it for herself. No driver, no suit, no assistant, just herself, the janitor. An image no one would question. A role so familiar to others, and yet so invisible that she would have the perfect vantage point. She moved past a platinum SUV and ran a gloved hand gently along its side, letting her fingers trail across the paintwork. One of the younger salesmen, stationed near the front desk, watched her closely, but said nothing. Another, sipping espresso behind the counter, muttered under his breath, "Maintenance shouldn't be out during business hours." His colleague chuckled. Neither made a move to greet her. That was exactly what Maya had hoped for. A woman in a pressed blazer brushed past her on the way to the reception area, offering not so much as a glance. Maya stepped aside politely, then turned toward the row of new electric models recently announced in the press. The floor staff seemed more intent on hovering near the man in a tailored vest browsing lease options than acknowledging her presence. The divide was obvious. The showroom sparkled under the ceiling lights, but the warmth didn't reach every corner, certainly not the one Maya occupied. And yet she didn't flinch. She moved with purpose, not aimless wandering. She was studying the culture, breathing in every subtle cue. The stiff posture of a staffer who spotted her but chose to look away, the whisper from a receptionist who thought she was out of earshot. "Janitor's lost," the woman said, laughing. "Or maybe here to dust the rims." None of them recognized her. They didn't know she had sat across the negotiation table 2 weeks ago. They didn't know she held the paperwork proving ownership. They didn't know that the woman they dismissed with their eyes was, in fact, here to decide their future. Maya moved closer to the matte black sports coupe displayed in the showroom center. It was the centerpiece, flanked by lights and angled to perfection, a statement piece, aggressive, fast, meant to symbolize power. Fitting, she thought. As she reached out to gently wipe a fingerprint smudge from the passenger side mirror, a sharp voice rang out from across the floor. "Excuse me. What are you doing?" It had begun. The moment Maya Thompson stepped into the sunlit showroom of Regal Drive, a hush fell over the cluster of staff near the front desk. Not out of respect, but from the subtle tension that often precedes judgment. Her janitor's uniform was plain and slightly faded from daily use. Her sneakers were visibly worn at the soles, and the heavy canvas bag slung across her shoulder bore smudges from cleaning chemicals. The contrast between her appearance and the polished glass, marble tiles, and chrome accents of the showroom couldn't have been starker. From a distance, the staff's reaction was almost imperceptible. But Maya had long since learned how to read the language of exclusion. She saw the side glances and quick snickers, the way posture stiffened and eyes narrowed in reflexive dismissal. Heather Lang, the tall blonde receptionist behind the circular white counter, leaned in toward her colleague, voice low but not low enough. "Looks like someone wandered in off the street. Another one here asking for janitorial work, probably." Across the room, sales consultant Josh Keller, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, smirked as he leaned one elbow on the edge of a sleek convertible. "Maybe she's here for one of our flyers. Can't resist a free pen or water bottle," he quipped, loud enough for those nearby to chuckle. One of the younger assistants let out a short laugh before catching Maya's gaze and quickly looking away, embarrassed, but not enough to stop. No one approached. No one offered the customary greeting given to real customers. They kept their distance, content to let her wander without interference. After all, she clearly wasn't part of their target demographic. A black woman, mid-40s, looking tired and carrying a cleaning kit. She didn't look like someone who could afford anything behind the glass walls, certainly not the custom Range or the new electric coupe on the showroom pedestal. Maya kept moving, slowly, almost as if browsing, but her eyes weren't lingering on the cars. She watched the team instead. Their hierarchy was clear. Heather controlled the front like a gatekeeper, filtering customers based on dress and demeanor. Josh and two other salesmen only engaged when someone walked in wearing polished shoes, a Rolex, or a tailored blazer. A middle-aged white man had come in minutes before her and had been welcomed with a beaming smile and a fresh cappuccino. She saw it all. She made a slow loop around a matte black sedan, noticing how one of the assistants followed her movements with suspicion, pretending to rearrange a rack of brochures while keeping her firmly in his periphery. The irony wasn't lost on Maya. These people had no idea she now owned every inch of this place, every logo on the window, every chair they sat in, every car key they polished before a test drive. But instead of announcing herself, she took a mental note of every slight, the muttered comments, the dismissive tones, the body language that broadcast disdain without a single word. Heather's voice floated again across the showroom. "Should we call someone? She's just circling the cars and she's got that cart with her." Josh replied with a chuckle. "Maybe she thinks she's blending in. I say let her look. She'll realize on her own that she's in the wrong place." Maya didn't flinch. She turned calmly, walked toward the sleek SUV by the front windows, and rested one hand on the frame as if inspecting it. The feel of the cool metal grounded her. She could already see it. The press release announcing her acquisition, the shocked faces when the staff realized who had walked among them. But today wasn't about headlines. It was about truth. It was about culture. And it was about confronting, in quiet observation, the deeply rooted bias that dictated which customers received a welcome and which received a whisper. In her mind, the data was already compiling. Employee names, their behaviors, who smirked, who stayed silent, who held their judgment in a polite mask, and who wore it proudly. It was all here, in plain sight. She moved toward the center of the showroom, where the newest model, an obsidian-toned sports hybrid, stood under a rotating platform of light. No one stopped her. No one asked if she needed help. And that silence, that indifference, spoke louder than any slur. Maya looked around once more, eyes scanning every corner, every smirking face, every customer who had arrived after her and was now sipping complimentary drinks, engaged in eager conversation with a smiling staff member. She noted it all with quiet precision. Then, with the same calm grace she'd entered with, she circled back toward the reception desk, ready to take the next step in revealing who she really was, and to begin exposing what this place had become. Maya had just stepped back from admiring the sleek lines of the black coupe under the central spotlight when a set of determined footsteps echoed sharply across the showroom floor. The soft hum of conversation and the ambient jazz soundtrack seemed to dim beneath the brisk staccato of high heels approaching from the side entrance. Heads turned, subtle and expectant, as the woman appeared, a commanding presence, shoulders square, chin high, eyes fixed ahead like a spotlight trained on a target. Sandra Moore. At roughly 50, Sandra had the air of someone who had ruled this space for years without ever having her authority questioned. Her perfectly ironed blazer, glossy pumps, and precision-styled blonde bob gave off the polished exterior of professionalism, but her narrowed eyes and taut mouth betrayed a deeper, colder calculation. She didn't stop at a distance. She walked straight toward Maya and came to a halt just a few feet away, placing herself directly between Maya and the centerpiece coupe as though guarding the car from contamination. Her voice was flat, firm, and not in the least welcoming. "This area is for scheduled customers only," she said, each word clipped and deliberate. "If you don't have an appointment, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Maya held her ground, her posture still relaxed, but her voice just as steady. "I'd just like to get a closer look at this model," she said, nodding toward the coupe behind Sandra. "I've been following its release for months." Sandra's expression didn't shift, but her eyes did, darting from Maya's cleaning tote to the scuffed sneakers at her feet. Her tone sharpened, slicing through the space between them. "This is Regal Drive, not a public showroom," she said with a tight-lipped sneer. "People like you aren't our target clientele. We don't have time for walk-ins pretending to browse." Maya blinked slowly, not in surprise but in measured disappointment. Around them, the staff was no longer pretending to be busy. Tyler leaned on a column by the entrance, clearly enjoying the show. Brenda, the assistant from earlier, nudged Heather and smirked. It was all so thinly veiled, amusement disguised as professionalism, mockery wrapped in corporate smiles. Sandra, emboldened by the quiet support behind her, took a step closer. "I don't care what story you've told yourself walking in here," she said. "This isn't a museum. This is a dealership for serious buyers, people with profiles, financial history, and taste." Her tone dragged slightly on the word taste, as though it was an exotic concept Maya could never possibly understand. "You've made your little loop around. Now it's time to go before I call security." It wasn't just a rejection. It was a ritual. The stripping away of dignity through a performance perfected over time. Sandra didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was lined with the practiced contempt of someone who had executed this kind of dismissal many times before and expected no consequence for it. Tyler chuckled audibly from the back. "Maybe she's here to buff the tires." Laughter bubbled from behind the reception counter. Brenda tried to stifle hers with a sip of coffee but failed miserably. Still, Maya didn't move. Her gaze remained calm, trained not on Sandra's face but just past her shoulder, on the car she had requested to see. Then she looked Sandra directly in the eyes. "I've asked respectfully, that's all," she said. "Respectfully?" Sandra scoffed, then crossed her arms. "Showing up in janitor gear and touching display vehicles is not respectful. It's disruptive." Maya's hand closed gently around the strap of her cleaning tote, not as a defense but as a reminder of purpose. She had seen all she needed. The unchecked cruelty, the smug pride, the way exclusion was served up with a smile and institutional backing. They weren't afraid to be obvious, because they believed people like her couldn't do anything about it. Brenda's voice floated from behind the desk, mock whispering, "Think she's lost? Maybe wandered in from the service entrance." Heather giggled again, then quickly turned her back, that of pretending to tidy a pile of brochures. And in that moment, with the laughter behind her and the condescension in front of her, Maya felt the familiar sting, not of insult, but of recognition. This wasn't just about her. It never had been. This was about every woman who'd ever been told she didn't belong in a room, every customer measured not by their questions, but by the price tag they were presumed to be unable to meet. She tilted her head slightly, letting the silence that followed Sandra's last statement stretch longer than was comfortable. Around them, the showroom grew quieter, the audience waiting for her to back down and slink out the way they assumed she would. She didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, she replied calmly, "You're right. This isn't a museum. It's a business. And businesses thrive or fall based on how they treat people, especially the ones they think don't matter." Sandra's lips pressed into a hard line. "You have 10 seconds to leave." Maya nodded once, slowly, her hand releasing the strap. Then, as though she had just made a mental note to remember this place, She turned and began walking toward the exit. But there was something in the way she moved now that unsettled even Sandra. There was no shame, no retreat, just quiet purpose, and an unsettling sense that the woman they had just ridiculed wasn't quite done with them yet. Just as Maya turned to move away from the black coupe, the polished floor beneath her seemed to reverberate with a new intensity. A different rhythm of footsteps, more clipped, more intentional, echoed through the high-ceilinged showroom. From behind the frosted glass office doors emerged a woman in a navy blue pantsuit, her heels striking the tile like punctuation marks. She was tall, fit, and carried the air of someone accustomed to authority. Sandra Moore, the longtime showroom manager of Regal Drive. She moved with quiet command, her shoulders squared, her mouth drawn into a line of rigid discipline. Her eyes, though not shouting, blazed with thinly veiled disdain the moment they locked on Maya. In that instant, everything around the showroom fell a notch quieter. Conversations faded. Fingers paused mid-type. Even the faint hum of jazz piped through the ceiling speakers seemed to draw back in anticipation of what was to follow. Sandra didn't hesitate. She approached Maya with purpose and placed herself directly in front of her, deliberately cutting off her view of the car. Her posture was confrontational without being loud, an artful wall of exclusion that Regal Drive had no doubt mastered over the years. "This display area is for scheduled appointments only," Sandra said, her voice clear, clipped, and loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "If you haven't booked a visit, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." Her tone didn't leave room for negotiation. It wasn't an offer, it was an eviction wrapped in passive professionalism. Maya remained where she stood, unfazed by the cold command. Her chin lifted slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I was hoping to take a closer look at that coupe," she said, motioning gently toward the center of the room. "The black one. I've been researching it for a while." Sandra didn't follow her gaze. She didn't even glance at the car in question. Her attention remained fixed on Maya's faded janitor uniform, the sneakers with worn edges, the tote that sagged slightly at her hip from years of use. With a scoff that barely masked her contempt, she leaned forward just enough to drop her voice into a sharper tone. "Let's be honest," she said, with a smile that held no warmth. "People like you aren't exactly the kind of clientele Regal Drive caters to. This isn't a showroom for curiosity or window shopping. It's a place of business, for serious buyers. We don't have time to entertain performances." The word performances lingered like a slap, not loud, not vulgar, but cutting, precise, and meant to humiliate. From behind the counter, Tyler tilted back in his chair, whispering something that made Brenda snort and cover her mouth with a file folder. The quiet ring of mockery didn't have to be loud to be heard. It was in the glances exchanged, the lifted brows, the slight shakes of heads. One of them even muttered, "Guess she thought this was a tour." Maya's gaze didn't waver. She took in every reaction, every voice that wasn't brave enough to speak above a whisper, but bold enough to mock behind her back. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a quiet disappointment layered beneath years of restraint. She took a breath and replied, her tone still neutral, still respectful. "I understand this is a place of business, but I'm not here to waste anyone's time. I made a simple request, that's all." Sandra folded her arms. "And I've given a simple answer. If you're not a client, you need to step outside. We have security on standby. I'm happy to call them if you prefer to be escorted." A pause followed. Not because Maya didn't have a response, but because the tension in the room had thickened. Staff nearby had stopped pretending to work. A few customers, sensing something unusual, glanced discreetly in their direction. Sandra, emboldened by the silence, added one final twist. "This car costs more than most people make in a year. I suggest you take a brochure and leave before this gets uncomfortable." Tyler, still perched at his desk, added under his breath, "If she can even read it." Laughter rippled from behind the desk. Brenda shook her head, chuckling. She probably came to apply for cleaning the showroom, not to buy from it. Maya closed her eyes for a beat, not to retreat, but to absorb the moment fully. The insults weren't new. The subtle derision wasn't new. But here, under the pristine chandeliers and beside polished vehicles worth 6 figures, the irony felt sharper than ever. When she opened her eyes again, the look she gave Sandra was measured and still. "Thank you," she said, nodding once. "You've told me everything I needed to know." Then, without waiting for another word, Maya turned and walked toward the exit. Not hunched, not hurried, but with the deliberate composure of someone who had seen behind the mask of luxury and understood what really powered the engine inside. As the glass doors eased open behind her, and she stepped into the midday sun, none of the staff watching her leave had any idea they had just turned away the new owner of Regal Drive. Maya stood motionless for a second, her fingers still curled around the cleaning rag she had instinctively clenched. The final words from Sandra, cutting, dismissive, drenched in prejudice, still hung heavy in the air like smoke after a small fire. Behind her, the soft snickers of Tyler and Brenda rang out again, tinged with cruelty and the kind of careless arrogance that thrived in places where no one expected consequences. Without a word, Maya turned toward the entrance. For a moment, it seemed she would quietly leave, absorbing yet another wound from a world too quick to judge. Then, halfway across the polished floor, she stopped. The motion was so sudden that it snapped every pair of eyes back to her. Maya reached into the side pocket of her janitor uniform and retrieved a plain black phone. Her back straight, chin slightly raised, she pressed a contact without hesitation. The room held its breath, not from awe but from sheer confusion. When she spoke, her voice was calm, direct, and effortlessly clear. "Ethan, I'm at Regal Drive. I need you to come down to the showroom. There's been a service issue." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't glance around, she didn't need to. Every syllable was measured, confident, and undeniable. It was the tone of someone who knew she belonged, of someone used to being listened to. Across the showroom, Tyler froze. Brenda slowly lowered her phone. Sandra, who had just pivoted to walk away in what she believed was a victorious dismissal, halted mid-step and turned, her expression tightening as a sliver of unease crept across her brow. No one knew who Ethan was, but the tone in Maya's voice suggested he wasn't coming to drop off supplies. Within 4 minutes, the entrance doors opened again, not casually this time, but with the distinct hiss and authority of someone who didn't wait for permission. Ethan Blake, regional director of Regal Automotive Group, strode into the room with crisp purpose. In his tailored navy blazer and pressed shirt, he looked every bit the executive. His eyes immediately scanned the room before locking on Maya. And then he smiled. Not politely, not vaguely, with respect. He walked straight up to her and extended his hand. "Miss Thompson," he said warmly, "my sincerest apologies. I came as soon as I got your call." A ripple of stunned silence swept the room. The same Maya who had been mocked minutes earlier for her shoes and cleaning tote. The woman they had dismissed as a nuisance or a maintenance worker wandering where she didn't belong. The woman Sandra had threatened to have removed by security. Now stood shaking hands with the regional director. Sandra's posture stiffened. Her face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, unable to mask the disbelief unraveling behind her practiced poise. Brenda's mouth parted slightly, eyes darting from Ethan to Maya as if trying to compute what was happening. Tyler backed up toward the SUV display, his hand brushing against a glossy fender like he needed something solid to anchor him. Ethan turned to face them all. His voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of finality. "For those of you who haven't had the privilege of meeting her yet," he began, "this is Maya Thompson. As of last week, she is the new owner of Regal Drive. She now oversees every decision, every team, and every single square foot of this showroom." A stunned gasp escaped from somewhere near the front desk. Heather, the receptionist, dropped the pen she'd been clutching. It hit the tiled floor with a faint, hollow click that echoed like punctuation on a moment none of them had seen coming. Sandra didn't move. Her lips parted as if to interject, but no sound came. The words she might have used, excuses, clarifications, corporate babble, faded before they could form. All she could do was stare at the woman she had just belittled, who now stood at the top of the very ladder Sandra had been so sure she commanded. Maya gave no dramatic speech. She didn't gloat or demand apologies. She simply stepped forward, eyes calm, her voice even, as she addressed the room. "I came today dressed as I am because I wanted to see the kind of service this showroom truly provides, especially to those who don't look like they're ready to buy a car. I didn't expect a red carpet, but I didn't expect mockery and disrespect either. Her gaze flicked briefly to Tyler, then Brenda, then settled on Sandra. And what I experienced wasn't just a bad moment. It was a culture. A way of thinking that says some people deserve your attention, while others don't even warrant common courtesy. She let the silence stretch. No one dared to speak. The same staff who had dismissed her without a second glance now struggled to meet her eyes. Ethan remained at her side, his arms crossed, saying nothing further. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a signal. Maya had full authority, and this was no formality. This was a reckoning. Maya looked around the room once more, her expression resolute. "This place," she said quietly, "is going to change." And there wasn't a single person left in that room who doubted she meant it. The silence that followed Maya's calm declaration was so heavy it seemed to settle into every crack of the gleaming showroom floor. Her voice, though never raised, had shifted the air, each word cutting clean through the false dignity that had hung in the room like a curtain of polished glass. No one moved. Even the clicking of keyboards and the distant hum of a printer had ceased. Regal Drive stood still. Ethan Blake remained a silent pillar at Maya's side, his expression unreadable but firm. Behind them, several customers who had been quietly browsing were now openly observing the confrontation, their eyes wide with disbelief, curiosity, and a budding sense of justice. One of them, a young man in a gray jacket, subtly lifted his phone. He had started recording when he saw the tension mount. Now, he was capturing something else entirely: consequences. Maya took a measured breath and turned to Sandra Moore. Her gaze was level, unblinking. Her tone didn't shift into cruelty, nor did it seek revenge. It remained calm, but carried an edge of finality that no one could mistake. "Miss Moore," she began, "you are terminated, effective immediately." The words hit like a thunderclap. Several employees gasped. Sandra's eyes widened. For a moment she didn't comprehend what she had heard. Her clipboard, still tucked under one arm, slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. She opened her mouth as if to speak, to protest, to explain. But no words came. Maya continued, her voice never faltering. "Your behavior today, the assumptions, the condescension, the explicit exclusion, violated not only this company's ethical standards, but the very dignity of every person who walks through these doors. Regal Drive does not and will not tolerate that." Sandra stood frozen, her face pale, the heat of public exposure creeping slowly up her neck. The room around her had become a silent jury, watching as the once commanding manager shrank in place, undone not by shouting, but by calm truth. Maya then turned to the reception desk. "Heather Lang," she said clearly. Heather jumped at the sound of her name, her fingers tightening around the pen she had been gripping nervously. She tried to maintain some semblance of composure, but her cheeks were already flushed and her breath shallow. "You are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct, including your remarks this afternoon and previous customer service complaints." Heather nodded once, then quickly looked away, blinking rapidly. She didn't argue, she couldn't. The truth was etched into too many witnesses, and now into the lens of a recording phone. "Josh Keller," Maya called next. Josh, who had been pretending to organize a folder on the far side of the showroom, slowly turned around. His jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "You are also suspended until further review. We'll be examining your recent customer interactions, and any signs of discriminatory behavior will be taken seriously." Josh's attempt at nonchalance faltered. He gave a stiff nod, then dropped his eyes to the floor. "Tyler Harris," Maya said finally. The young man stood near the back wall, his arms crossed. His smirk had long vanished. The boyish bravado he had worn earlier had been replaced with the expression of someone who realized, too late, how deeply wrong things had gone. "You, too, are suspended," Maya said. "We will be reviewing both your actions today and your internal records. In this showroom, attitude matters as much as performance." There was no dramatic protest. No one defended themselves. They had already lost their ground before a single word was spoken in their favor. Maya let the silence settle again before speaking to the room at large. Her voice softened, but her words struck with greater clarity than ever. "We are in the business of selling excellence. But excellence isn't just leather seats and horsepower. It's how we treat people. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect, regardless of what they wear, how they speak, or what car they drove in. That is the new standard. She paused, then added, starting today, Regal Drive no longer serves arrogance. We only serve respect. A quiet murmur rose from the handful of customers who remained. One older woman nodded approvingly. Another man clapped once, then stopped, unsure if it was appropriate, but the sound echoed across the glass walls like a signal of quiet affirmation. Near the back of the room, the young man with the phone was still filming. What had begun as idle curiosity had become a story he knew people needed to see. He would upload it later, under the caption, "Black Janitor fired on site, reveals she owns the place." Within hours, the clip would spread across platforms like wildfire. The footage of Maya, standing tall in her work uniform, addressing an entire showroom with calm authority, would resonate with thousands. Comments would flood in, some outraged, some inspired, many thankful. Hashtags would bloom like wildfire across the digital landscape. Hashed respect over rank, justice at Regal Drive, her showroom, her rules. And while Maya didn't speak another word after that final declaration, the quiet ripple she had started would soon rise into a wave. Because in that gleaming space full of luxury cars, it was not wealth or title that had redefined power. It was dignity, clarity, and the refusal to remain unseen. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that day at Regal Drive never truly faded. The viral video had stirred waves far beyond Austin, drawing attention from national media, corporate ethics groups, and thousands of individuals who saw in Maya's quiet resolve a reflection of their own unseen struggles. Yet within the dealership itself, the most powerful changes happened not online, but within its walls. 1 month later, under the soft morning light that filtered through the newly remodeled glass entryway, Maya stood before a semicircle of fresh faces. A new employee orientation was underway, and the atmosphere felt charged with curiosity, humility, and the fresh scent of polish and possibility. Maya, still wearing her signature simplicity, pressed slacks, a plain blouse, and her favorite canvas shoes, walked the new hires through Regal Drive's revamped values: respect, integrity, empathy. She didn't recite them like slogans. She told stories, gave examples, asked questions, and most of all, she listened. That morning wasn't just about company rules, it was about cultivating a culture worth staying for. Midway through the session, a young intern barely out of college raised his hand. His voice was hesitant but sincere. "Miss Thompson," he asked, "what did you do the moment they looked down on you? How did you respond when they dismissed you like you didn't belong?" The room grew still. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick more softly. Maya didn't answer right away. She walked slowly to the center of the table and reached into her bag. She pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card and placed it on the surface. The gold-embossed letters shimmered under the light. Maya Thompson, owner, Regal Drive Automotive. She looked around the room and smiled, calm and unshaken. "I didn't need to yell," she said. "I didn't need to defend myself with words louder than theirs. I just stood my ground and let the truth speak for itself." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful. Even the most confident among the new hires sat a little straighter, their eyes reflecting something deeper than admiration. It was respect. Maya nodded once, then gathered her notes. "Now," she added gently, "let's get back to the kind of work that matters." And as the interns leaned forward to listen, one last question lingered. Not in Maya's voice, but in the air, as if meant for everyone who would one day face the same quiet trial. "When it's your turn to be underestimated, what will you do? Let your answer shape the world you leave behind."